Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Beth Sweeny, Director of Community and Government Relations at Flagler College, and I will serve as the moderator for today's conversation. I'm so grateful you all have joined us this Friday afternoon to hear from our expert panelists on the 2021 legislative session. We have had a small change in our panelist lineup today. Unfortunately, Matt Dixon will be unable to join us. Fridays are usually a quieter day in Tallahassee, but today the Florida House took up House Bill 1, which is the anti-riot legislation on the floor, and announced they would spend 6 hours in debate. So Matt is covering this discussion currently, and in his place, we are lucky to have Mr. Gary Fineout, also with Politico, join us. So a big welcome to our panelists. I will take a moment and introduce each of them. So we have with us Peter Schorsch, is the president of Extensive Enterprise Media and the publisher and executive editor of FloridaPolitics.com, Influence Magazine, and a suite of podcasts and email newsletters, including Sunburn, the morning read of what's hot in Florida politics. In addition to his publishing work, Peter is a political consultant to numerous elected officials, as well as some of the state's largest companies, governmental affairs, and public relations firms. Welcome, Peter. As I said, we also have Gary Fineout. He's the author of The Florida Playbook and joined Politico in February of 2019. He has covered state government, politics, and education in Florida for more than 25 years. Fineout has worked for the Associated Press, the Miami Herald, the Tallahassee Democrat, as well as the New York Times regional newspaper group. And last but certainly not least, we have Amanda Stewart, who is a partner with Johnston and Stewart Government Strategies with offices in Tallahassee and Tampa. She has over 15 years of engagement with engagement within the legislative process, both as a legislative aide and a lobbyist. She served as chief of staff to former state representative, has directed policy, presented bills, led appropriations, guided communication, and operated as an external liaison. Amanda has been an integral part of both local and state campaigns, consulting on grassroots advocacy and funding strategies. Her mastery of the budget process and ability to guide funding projects has produced millions of dollars in funding for her clients. So again, thank you all for joining us today. Welcome. Before we get started, a little housekeeping. We will have time at the end of the conversation for questions from our attendees. If you would like to ask a question, please submit it through the Q&A box, not the chat box. We will not be monitoring that, so please use the Q&A box. Now let's go ahead and get into it with our panelists. I'm going to start with Amanda. If you would briefly set the stage for us, kind of with where we are in the process, how Florida's legislative process works for those who may be joining us that are not familiar. If you can just give us a brief rundown, and then we'll ask Peter and Gary to jump in too.
Thank you for having me, and I'll be very brief. I'm sure what I will say is probably the least interesting of all of the things that you'll hear today, but we are just about halfway through. So it's an aptly named webinar that Beth has provided for us today. We reached sort of our halfway point on Wednesday of this week. And so we have 5 weeks to go in a 9-week session, which is really a 60-day session. So the Florida Legislature is what we call a part-time legislature. I would venture to say that if you ask almost any legislator, they would tell you it is not a part-time position, but they do meet for only a couple months of the year. It feels like a lot longer. And from my perspective, and I'm sure from my other panelist friends' perspective, it does not feel like a part-time gig. So we have 60 days in session. It started March 2nd of this year, and that's when the 60-day clock starts. But we really convene and do a lot of our work in the committee week process, which is anywhere from 2 to 4 months. So we're in what I call a regular session. This is a session that our committee weeks start. Our real one starts in December. We go through January and February in committee weeks. And then we start session usually sometime at the beginning of March, and that lasts for 60 days. So this year we're done April 30th. Usually it's the first week of May. Our 2022 legislative session is what I call an early session. And so that session will start in January. Committee weeks will start likely in September of next year. So not next year, this year. That session almost seems like an extension of this session. At least that's what it's felt like in recent years. So, like I said, it doesn't seem like a part-time sort of thing. A lot of the work that my industry and lobbyists, what we do is in what we call the off season. So that's in between when a session ends and the committee week starts, when we get a lot of our work done. A lot of the education process gets accomplished then. So usually if you're just starting to talk about your policy and budget initiatives and committee weeks, you're already behind. And that's what I mean about it not being, it's a year-long process, no matter. So in Florida, because probably of our time constraints in that 60 days, there's a lot that gets done. It's a pressure cooker every day. Every day feels like 3 days at least minimum. We have a lot of bills filed. So let's say ballpark around 3,000, give or take. A couple hundred of those will pass. And we could spend a whole webinar on what those bills look like. There's local bills, general bills, appropriations bills, committee bills. A lot of work is put into the filing of those bills, and then just a few hundred get accomplished. And a lot of that is, like I said, the time constraint, but also probably because of term limits and the constant education process that it takes with members. There's just not a lot of time to get things done. And so that sometimes it takes an initiative several years to get accomplished. And then finally, so as to not bore all of you anymore, I'll just touch on what the makeup of the Florida legislature looks like. We have a Republican trifecta in Florida. So that means the governor's office is held by a Republican, and the Republican Party holds a majority of the House and the Senate. For an actual breakdown, 78 Republicans, 42 Democrats in the House, 24 Republicans, and 16 Democrats in the Senate. More than we had last year. This last election cycle gave a little boost to the Republican Party, even more so than they already had. So we are, like I said, at the half point of session. There's a lot of really interesting issues happening. One of them just ended. Literally as we were starting the webinar. So I will turn it back over to Beth, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. All right, Peter, Gary, anything you want to add in as we set the stage?
I'd love questions. It's important for our audience. HB1, the controversial anti-protest legislation, just passed as we're talking right now. And I think it's also kind of interesting to note that the 3,000th bill was filed, I think, sometime last night. That's actually down at this point in the session. At this point in session was like 35, 60 or something like that. There were that many bills. And the other thing, it's why Gary and I are probably so busy, and Matt and everybody else who's covering it. The Senate just released its budget, all of its budget bills, $95 billion budget. That's just a massive increase over the last 10 years, even in a pandemic. So there's a lot going on right now. Be happy to take questions, and thank you very much for having us. Flagler is my favorite private institution in Florida. I love how beautiful it is. My wife and I fell in love with each other. That's too much information at the hotel at the Casa Monica across the street. So there's just all sorts of love for Flagler.
Thank you. Well, I think you did. Oh, sorry, Gary, did you want to jump in?
Oh, only to concur that Flagler has a beautiful campus, and my daughter thought about going there, so she didn't. But yeah, it is a truly, it's always great to walk around there. It is such a beautiful location.
Great. Well, I will always take accolades for my alma mater, so keep them coming. I think Peter did a great job too of kind of bringing up a couple issues I wanted us to talk about today, both the budget and HB1. So let's tackle the budget first, and then we can get into some of the policy. We know the budget is really the only thing that the legislature has to accomplish every year is to pass a budget. And unlike the federal government, Florida's budget has to be balanced. So that provides an extra set of challenges, especially given COVID and the state projecting a massive shortfall. As it stands right now, they're projecting over a $2 billion shortfall for the budget. So can you, Peter, you mentioned that the House and the Senate's just released their budgets this week, rolled them out. Can you guys, Peter, you want to start us off? Give us your take of where the budget stands and any of the issues that you saw emerge as these proposals were released.
I think the narrative with the budget is it's a fake budget. Unlike almost any time before, this entire budget, what was put out today, is based on December revenue projections of where the state was going to be. And it doesn't include any federal money backfilling any of the things that have been cut. So and Amanda's probably much smarter about this than we are, and I'm sure she's working to get as much in there as possible for many clients. But what's going to happen is you're going to see all these cuts now. It's going to be, Politico described it as a red wedding. You're going to see all these bad scenarios for hospitals and healthcare and et cetera, et cetera. And then we're going to get the April projections. And they're going to be very late. But I think a lot of that will restore the money that is missing. And then whatever they don't have, remember, the legislature has to appropriate billions of dollars from the federal government. They can use that to backfill. There's talk of a Florida stimulus bill coming in at the last minute. I think the only thing that's a hiccup for all of this, and again, Amanda and certainly Gary, who always will tell you he has a hashtag, read the back of the bill. I think that if you don't get if it isn't in the House's budget at a certain point, it can't be added in there later. And so even if this additional money comes in from the revenue projections, if it's not in there at some level, it's going to be very difficult. Now, the speaker can waive the rules, et cetera, and get it, but it does present a little bit of a problem. So I think it's an important narrative right now that this is, unlike sessions past, this is a really a different budget situation in terms of it's going to change a great deal between now with this budget being presented today and in the next 30 days at the end of session.
Thank you. Anybody else want to add into that?
Well, I think just to amplify what Peter said, basically, we're really in uncharted waters here because it doesn't really happen like this at all. And what we're a little bit unclear on is the motivations and the strategy that seems to be behind all of it. I think the fact of the matter is you do have billions in federal money that is supposed to come in at some time in the near future. And they're proceeding as if it's not going to happen. And certainly you would take the position that you want a budget to be based upon reality. That certainly makes a lot of sense, but it is interesting as to what the justification is to create all this turmoil and havoc and everything right now in terms of the possibilities of what might happen. And so I think that's just, it's just unusual. I mean, and frankly, it was unusual that, and not to get too far into the weeds, Peter knows what I'm talking about. The fact that they pushed off the estimating conferences, the main one being what's called the General Revenue Estimating Conference. You normally would have had the one for the session done by now so that the legislature would have the most up-to-date numbers for the estimates for economic activity and sales tax collection. And they've kind of decided to push that off until a couple of weeks down the road. So it's, there appears to be, I don't want to go so far as to say shenanigans.
Don't you say shenanigans on a Friday. Don't go there. Don't say.
But here's the important thing that for people who are less into the weeds that they need to be aware of. the budget is the grease that holds the session together. It really is. And people can say, well, why do you focus so much on the budget? Well, because for the most part, you can't conclude a session without the budget being locked down. You can't get it done. The reason, frankly, is there is a lot of horse trading that goes on during a session. And part of that is, do you want money for something? Do you want a thing that you want prioritized to be taken care of in the budget? And so what you will often see is, and furthermore, there might be a deal in the budget that ties to some form of legislation, even though they're not, connected from a policy standpoint. They're connected in terms of the trading that goes on. So that's why what happens with the budget can affect the flow of the entire session. And that's why we spend a lot of time paying attention to it, because we know that if the budget doesn't get done, or if there's something holding it up, then that can affect everything else.
I think another thing, just to add into this, as you know, and again, if you really want to follow somebody during session when it comes to the arcanity of the bill, it is at Fineout. He really does. I just throw out kind of haymakers, and shoot and tweet and don't really look at stuff. But Gary does dive into some of these bills, and it's so important to follow him throughout this session. I do think that, I think it is important to say that the two legislative leaders are revealing some of their priorities in these budgets, though. Even though some of this, like the hospitals took it on the chin. And it's going to be interesting to see some of that money clawed back. It might not get there. They're being told that it's going to be there. But, if people are, a-holes about it, if they start, there's been a lot of bad statements put out. Mary Mayhew, the new Florida Hospital Association president, she put out a pretty tough statement yesterday or earlier this morning. Maybe the leaders don't put as much money in there. I think one of the things that pertains to this audience is it's clear that the Senate is just whacking higher education. Separate of what was going on with Bright Futures, there are some deep cuts. The growth that we've seen, under Negron, or that you all saw under Negron, that is coming to an end, and it's coming to an end pretty quickly. In fact, I'm looking at it right now. I'm trying to look through this filing bill, and I don't think this is going to change no matter what is going to happen. I think there's a cap on salaries that they're going to put in universities of $180K, which $180,000 is a lot of money, sure, but that is try and attract a director of your medical center at USF for only $180,000. So there's a clear shot being made by the Senate against higher education. There's also a lot of money that's going to be put into the environment from the Senate, which is a priority now. You see a lot of projects for north of Lake Okeechobee, which is a priority for Wilton Simpson. So even though this is a fake budget, even though we're going to see some additional numbers later in April, we definitely see the contours of the priorities of the leaders in these documents.
I agree.
Sorry.
Amanda, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I did. I'm sorry, I was muted myself. In regards to higher education, there is something that is very, very important to Flagler and its students that's going on right now in the House. And that is basically, there was a proposal that just came out within the last day. Came out on Wednesday, I think. Basically, it would involve overhauling and cutting the money that's available for the financial aid that goes to private students. It used to be known as the Florida Resident Access Grant. It's now known as the EASE. There are proposals to tie the money to matrices that would be developed for the institutions. And right now, it looks like there are going to be cuts there are cuts in the House budget to that program, and I don't know where that's all going to end up in the end. But it is I saw one of the people who represent the institutions, the private institutions, get up in front of the House 2 days ago and sort of express a deep amount of concern, because as you know, that financial aid award, which the state gives to students who, you get it if you go to a private school, you get it in Florida, and so obviously if they start monkeying around with that, that's going to be something that's going to be of great importance to you all.
Yeah, that's actually that was gonna be where I was gonna go next, was the EASE grant, and we see it's probably in the weeds for some of you, but we do see some discrepancies between the House and the Senate. The Senate actually increased the award. President Simpson has been a strong supporter of the EASE program, or as you said, formerly known as FRAG. And so, several years ago, we were at $3,500 a student. We were cut back to $2,800, and President Simpson has put in the budget to raise it back up to $3,500 per student. But as Gary mentioned, in the House, they have taken almost the opposite approach in trying, or I wouldn't say opposite, a different approach of tying metrics to the institution, whereas this money really flows to the student and the student makes the choice, but it would limit which schools the students could take those funds to based on the metrics. I think Flagler, based on what we've seen, would still qualify, but it is going to be interesting to see how it shakes out between the two chambers. I don't know if any of you have any additional insight on that issue.
No additional insight. I would say that Peter talked about the Senate, and I think the focus on the House as far as higher education is separate and apart than what Gary spoke about, because clearly that just happened. And so that remains to be seen what that looks like at the end. I think that the bigger focus on higher education is the state university system for the House. And, to Peter's point earlier, a lot of this budget is going to change. I would assume that there will be some improvement at the state university level, but not a ton. And it has not been a secret from the speaker that this is something that he is really interested in doing. He thinks that it's been a little bit gross, the spending that's happened there. And there is nobody on the opposite side in the other chamber to counter that. It is a very different Senate in many ways, but specifically as it relates to higher education and specifically as it relates to state university spending. So I do think that it's still going to be pretty dismal at the end of session for that. And then, just to follow up on the hospital and the healthcare piece, I do think that will improve. But again, to Peter's point, as long as people don't get a little crazy, there's a lot of personal issues, that the Senate president doesn't really hide that. The speaker doesn't really either. And when it comes to hospitals, there's some concerns with the associations, and I don't know that they did themselves any favor. So that's just my way of essentially echoing everything that both Gary and Peter just said. And then related specifically, Beth, to what you just said, I think that issue remains to be seen, but I don't think that the focus is to hurt anyone in higher education as much as the state university system.
I agree with that. I think we've seen, even outside of the funding piece, a lot of legislation aimed at the university system.
Can we talk about one other thing really quick also, just to, because, Gary talking about the unprecedentedness of all of this, there is, and Amanda is an appropriations lobbyist, so I know that she's probably getting some vacation home blueprints designed, because they have basically put out this big matzo ball of $4, $5, $6, $7 billion and have said we only want shovel ready projects for this money. So they're not doing it to increase the per pupil spending on education or to do Medicaid or something like that, something that would eat up billions of it. They are saying, hey, bring us your poor, wretched water projects, bring us your sewer systems, bring us your buildings and everything like that. And so if you have got a project that you want to get funded right now, this is the lottery. This is back up the truck time at the Florida legislature. And we've never, the governor, he laid out his recommendations the other day, and it only ate up, half the money. And he had a big expansive list. So I think it's just going to be, you're looking at what, like I heard somebody the other day, you're going to have $1 billion sprinkle list, which is, the list of money that the two legislative leaders get to dole out at the end, their own projects. I just think that that's going to end up being, at the end of the day, the dominant storyline of the last week or so of session, what they do with that, of that manna from heaven. Yeah,
I agree. I think we're looking at quite the sprinkle list. So I want to move us along. Let's jump into a couple of kind of the hot button issues in Tallahassee right now. We mentioned HB1 at the beginning of this, which just passed the House. For those who are not familiar, this is the bill titled Combating Public Disorder, and it's kind of following all the civil unrest that happened this past year. This bill, the governor called for this legislation to crack down on violent protesters. And so among many other things, we know the bill puts penalties in place for rioting, puts some definitions in place for rioting. What else can you all tell us about this bill? What do you see happening with it? We know the House just passed it, but the Senate hasn't moved their bill at all. So what do you foresee happening on this issue?
Am I allowed to really quick? I just want to get my hashtag in so that I get credit for it and Gary doesn't steal it from me next in a couple of weeks. This is the hashtag Own the Libs session. And it's basically, if you want to know what the legislative agenda of this legislature is, you should be turning into Fox at about 10 p.m. each night when Laura Ingraham gets on. And I don't say that necessarily in a critical way. The vote, I think one of the things that we don't connect is that the Republican voters that elected these lawmakers, people in Cord Bird's district, et cetera, they are really worried about Black Lives Matter, Antifa, the Chinese, Hunter Biden, et cetera. And so they have got their lawmakers to put forward this Own the Libs agenda, which involves the HB1 legislation you talked about, but it also includes, looking for, the so-called academic freedom, where they're going to survey college professors, talking about investigating Chinese influence, which is probably a worthwhile project. I will cede on that one. There's just a variety of bills out there floating around. There's a bill denouncing communism and forcing, an hour to be spent in each classroom on going against communism. So there's this whole package of Laura Ingraham inspired legislation, which is probably going to pass, by the way, that's out there. And it is going to be the thing that gathers the headlines, while other important issues like Bright Futures and property insurance, et cetera, are modified heavily.
All right. Anybody else want to jump in on that?
I think Peter's correct. I mean, there's a lot of this being driven at some point by Governor DeSantis and heading into a re-election, and also positioning himself as the heir to Donald Trump in 2024. And there is a string of bills that deal with that. And I also would agree with Peter that what's interesting is, yes, it's going to get DeSantis and Sprouse and other people talking points to go out on a Fox News, and that gets them attention that they need from the base. But also, he is absolutely correct, though. There are a lot of things that basically one of the rules of the legislature is they often do things that they regret 6 months later. Because 6 months later, because the plain fact is, a lot of people pay attention to some extent, political junkies, they pay attention to what's going on in the legislature. The reality is most people out on the street don't know who their legislators are. They don't. They probably know more about their mayor or their local county commissioner or city commissioner than they do who's representing them or what district they live in the legislative. And the thing about it is and this happened under Democrats and it happens under Republicans. They pass bills, and then several months later, it sort of trickles out into the real world, and then all of a sudden, there's like, oh my gosh, what did they do? Now, Bright Futures has been a little bit different. There's been immediate pushback, but that the property insurance bill, and there's several bills like this that are just like, well, what are they doing, and what is it going to wind up being in the end? And it's just that's the thing, is that those things are going to be the bills that actually have more impact on people's lives. What happens to college scholarships? What happens to their property insurance bills? Things of that nature are going to have a much more demonstrable effect than, whether, I don't want to completely downplay it. Obviously, I think, it's interesting in Washington, there is a level of bipartisan agreement on tech companies. They are coming at the right and the left are coming at it from different vantage points, but there is some agreement that something needs to happen. And but the question is, what is the Florida legislature going to do about that? And what does it make sense? I mean, so I'm, I will tell you that I do have this feeling in the back of my mind is that Peter was talking about lobbyists making a lot of money. I have a feeling there's going to be some lawyers who are going to be making a lot of money after session, because I think there's a bunch of legislation that's probably going to wind up getting challenged one place or another. And whether or not they win, I don't know. But I just get the feeling that there's a lot of things piling up that look like they're going to be ripe for lawsuits.
Another thing, and I just keep jumping in. I'm sorry, but I love panels. I'm really sad. We're coming to the end of panel life, of Zoom panel life. And I flourished under panel life. I just tore around in this RV like John Madden and go to panels. And so
I want your job.
There's something to be said also about like the Republicans. Why don't the Republicans like the Republicans right now? Like, I see some of these bills, and Gary brings up a good point, the 6-month rule. There's a couple of bills out there. I don't think that they understand their base in a lot of ways. And, the Bright Futures attack is really bad for Republicans, because who uses up Bright Futures? It's middle class white folk. That is the base of the Republican Party. If you look at that, and they went at that. I mean, the meritocracy of Bright Futures, that's a Republican, that should be a Republican ideal. And so you take Bright Futures, you add in like their attacks on not implementing the minimum wage fully. You talk to like Rob Bradley, now that he's an ex-senator, he'll tell you, when he was campaigning for his wife in, the counties north of St. John's, Clay, and all those other counties that make up Northeast Florida, the counties that we drive through on the way to the beaches, those are hard scrabbles areas. They wanted that they voted for Trump. They voted for the minimum wage. They wanted that. And then third, you add in the attack on the voter laws. Republicans dominate this state for 26 years now, I think. And that we're going to undo the rules that have got there because of one man in Mar-a-Lago. And it's basically, it's like trying to tie Tom Brady's arm behind his back. I mean, Republicans win on mail-in voting, on drop boxes, et cetera. And so if you talk to the Republican consulting class, they're not going to go against, they're not going to say it out loud, but they will say it to each other. They are very alarmed and they're very worried about this voter reform bill taking place, because it's going to unilaterally disarm Republicans from what they've done to win all these elections, 13-something election cycles in a row now.
Well, you even see the supervisor of elections, who are typically more in line with the Republican leadership, opposing some of these changes to the election laws. But we'll see how that shakes out. I know we keep referencing the Bright Future. So for those joining us who aren't aware of the issue, there was some legislation the Senate has been pushing to tie Bright Futures funding and other financial aid funding the state provides to programs that lead to jobs. And so I think there was a lot of outcry that came as a result of this bill, and we have seen some pretty substantial changes being made to do away with that provision. There's still some tweaks, some changes going on there. I've heard the House is not wild about the proposal that the Senate's pushing, so we'll see where it goes. I do want to allow some time for questions, and I think we've hit most of the big policy issues, unless anyone has anything to add. I will give the speaker some props for an initiative that he rolled out this week that I was really excited to see. Not so much an Own the Libs, but a great display of bipartisanship to push extending Medicaid coverage for new moms and their babies, which is currently limited to 60 days, but under this proposal, it would extend it to a full year. So it is good to see some bipartisanship happening and some good policy being pushed. Anybody else have any issues they want to bring to our audience's attention that you think are going to be impactful this session before we head into audience questions. And audience, if you have questions, please go ahead and get those in the Q&A box.
I mean, I would, other than the budget, there's a lot of things tied to the budget, right? So just like Gary said, it's a lot of it rests on the budget, but you know, there's some things that are going to make a difference. The online tax collections that just passed the Senate, that there's an agreement to in the House, what that looks like for unemployment, generally speaking, some other issues that are, you know, with gaming. It remains to be seen what happens with that. It's you know, there's a lot going on there. You know, there's a lot of things flying under the radar that I probably won't talk about completely here, but you know, there's still a lot that's being worked on. The property insurance and PIP and mandatory BI. These are all things that are still kind of floating around out there that, you know, priorities of the president and of the speaker, things certainly change though, right? We're halfway through session and we'll see what happens. So, you know, there's a lot of different issues, but the ones that we've touched on are certainly the big ones for right now.
We have one question in the Q&A box right now. What is the one issue no one is talking about that may not pass this year, but will sometime soon?
I'm trying to think.
I'm gonna leave that one to Peter and Gary.
What are they pushing off right now? I'm trying to think of what is, you know, I mean, you know, it's Gary's favorite issue, which is gaming, you know, which, you know, we could talk about that because it's being talked about, it's being bantered about. I think the thing with gaming that, you know, right now we have the amendment that says you can't make any real changes to the gaming laws. You can't expand without another constitutional amendment. The only way, so that gives the Seminole Tribe of Florida enormous power, and so they've basically stopped paying their money to the state, while places, the pari-mutuels, still have what are called player designated games, which is like 3-card poker and all these other things that are in fad right now. I think one of the things that's driving that is, I think that one of the things that's going to drive maybe a solution, maybe this year. I think Wilton Simpson definitely wants a deal done. You know, I hear quietly he's a very good blackjack player. I think one of the things that is going to force it is the issue of sports betting. Sports betting is such a massive revenue stream in so many other states right now. You know, you've got, like in Washington, you've got a sports book in the Washington Capitals, Washington Wizards stadium, and sports betting is, you know, a few years ago, you know, it was something that you did quietly. If you had a bookie, it wasn't a big deal. You'd go out to Vegas. Nowadays, while you're sitting in your watching a game, you can be gambling on who's going to score the next basket. The sports leagues are increasingly dependent on sports betting, and the shows like ESPN, you watch ESPN, it's not so much about the show anymore. It's about the fantasy league. It's about what the spread is, et cetera. And so I think that there's going to be pressure, especially in a wide open state, sports friendly state like Florida, to get some sort of sports betting deal made. And with that, you can run it through the tribe. They could get sports betting as a deal, and then other people could keep other things, like these pari-mutuels could keep these so-called player designated games. It'd be a hell of a deal for the Seminole Tribe. It'd be a hell of a deal for the pari-mutuel people. I think that you know, the argument's always been there's 3 parts of the gambling equation, and 2/3 always block the other third. I think you would get the tribe, you know, the pari-mutuels, and you saw it with Ron DeSantis. He had the big casino owners in, Marion Adelson, who's the widow of Sheldon Adelson, probably one of the biggest gaming interests in the country. She was just in Tallahassee last week. So I could see where that maybe gets done in 2022.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna ask one last question, and then we'll end with some a simple prediction. Anybody want to take on where the Republican pickups? You know, Amanda mentioned that the House picked up some additional seats. So were the Republican pickups on the House side a good thing for the Speaker and his governing, or did they do they just add a little bit more stress to his plate with more members to manage?
Well, I was going to say that parlays into what you were talking about, upcoming things. The other real big thing that is on the horizon is redistricting. That's going to come up in early 2022. And there's going to be a big push to redo these maps that they are currently operating under. On the very least, Florida could be picking up 2 additional congressional seats and going up to 29. And so that will create a scramble. And that always affects things because sometimes legislators think that they want to go to Congress and they hope that they get a seat that will make it easier for them to get to Congress. So that always gets into the mix. But it would not be surprising to see them also redo the legislative maps as well. I'm sure that they think that the Senate has been a little bit too close for comfort the last couple of years. I mean, the Democrats have hinted at getting close, and they made a little edgeway, and then they fell back again in 2018. And although that's might kind of now under a little bit of scrutiny with a criminal investigation going on in Miami-Dade. But I think that the deal is redistricting is going to be a big factor in 2022, and what happens with the Republicans going forward. And, you know, then the Democrats have to decide whether or not they want to file lawsuits like they did last time. We have a constitutional amendment that was passed by the voters that aims at creating sort of a partisan neutral type of a process. There was a lot of questions as to whether or not that was adhered to during the last go round. But then we also have a reconstituted state Supreme Court. So you have people who think, well, the court threw it out last time. Will this court do the same? So I think it's going to be a lot to watch over the next year heading into the 2022 cycle to see what happens with redistricting. And that's part of the reason they meet early. That is the main reason that they meet early in 2022 is because it's going to be a January session, because the idea is you may have to redo the maps and people have to change where they're going to be running and things of that nature. So I'm going to be very interested where all that winds up playing in the months ahead.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up redistricting. Wasn't on my radar, but I think you're right. It's gonna be a big issue coming up. Okay, I want to thank all of you. I know we're gonna try to get you out of here because this is a busy time of year for you. So thank you again for spending part of your day with us and sharing your expertise, and thank you for all who attended. I'll let each of you close out and ask you simply, as Amanda noted, we have a 60-day legislative session, and sometimes the legislature is not able to get all their work complete, get the budget done on time. So do you think the legislature is going to end on time this year? Are we going to get out on April 30th?
If not earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the issue is that we were just talking about the whole budgetary situation. I just don't. I'm wondering if we're going to get into this weird situation where they take a pause, and we've had this happen before, where they take a pause and they come back to finish it later, and partly because we've got all this federal money and we're not sure how much federal money we've got, and while we've got the bare bones of the budget kind of figured out, is that where we want to wind up? I mean, it wouldn't shock me. It wouldn't shock me if all of a sudden they say, no, let's come back in, mid to late May to finish up the work on the budget when we get everything else taken care of. I'm not saying that's going to happen. This is not based on any reporting. I'm just saying it is the whole phenomenon of giving billions of dollars and injecting it into the process late. I just don't know how all that's going to wind up.
I agree with Gary. There will not be a handkerchief dropped on April 30th.
I'm gonna hold strong, you guys.
For her own sanity, Amanda is holding strong. All right. Well, thank you all again. We'll on April 30th, I'm going to hold you all to these. We'll see what ends up happening. Okay. Thank you all again, and have a wonderful weekend, rest of your Friday. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Keep having us.